As always, welcome back to another episode of Bleav in Tigers podcast. We are coming to you after a win. The Tigers were in Target Field, game two of their series last night. Obviously, there was no episode last night because it was July 3rd, the day leading up to July 4th, and there were fireworks pretty late into the night here in Michigan. So, just a warning on why this didn't come out earlier. But, the game myself, I thought it was pretty solid. This was Kyler Montero's probably not probably. This is his best MLB start and might be one of his most quality starts ever. This is his longest start ever. The first time he ever reached into the seventh inning, he didn't go into the full seventh, but he did get an out. And I felt like the swing and miss stuff, which was really what you counted on Kyler Montero for, and why I thought he was so valuable and why I thought, he was the guy that the Tigers had chose to bring up from AAA. Those numbers weren't really there today, but the stuff looked a lot better. Um, and granted, the command is not there. Okay, his control is sporadic at best, but the stuff was amazing. I feel like a slider moved the most that we've ever seen it move at the major league level, and maybe it did get a ton of movement in AAA. Um, I haven't really seen much of him in AAA, but he reached over 3,000 RPM in his start, which is crucial. So it's looking like he does have MLB league stuff, and I talked about this when they first called him up. I didn't think necessarily that he you know had major league stuff or was what I would consider a quality MLB pitcher, but maybe he is that. And this start is very encouraging for a guy like Kyler Montero. He went six and a third, only 6 hits, 2 runs. One of those came very late in the start, came in the seventh inning, um, which honestly I was shocked he kind of got the seventh. The pitch count was low. I think it was around 77 or 76 heading into the eighth, or heading into the seventh. I'm sorry. But Hinch doesn't really tend to give pitchers a ton of innings. And a game where you play an offense like Minnesota, I feel like you want to be very wary. But then again, the bullpen has been completely miserable in the past 2 weeks. And guys that you thought you could rely on, like the Bo Brisky and Will Vest and Andrew Chafin and other guys of that nature, have really struggled in recent history. So I think that is why he got the seventh, because Hinch felt better, you know, putting a guy out there that had gone 7 innings deep, or 6 innings deep, I'm sorry, than anybody in that bullpen, which is kind of ridiculous to think about because going into the season and early in the season, like especially in April, you thought you had a really solid bullpen. And that was one of the main outlooks of this team is, okay, we got a couple of starters, but the bullpen is really solid. And I think Pyder Montero can be a very, very strong addition to this pitching rotation if he can just, find his command, because that has been the problem. And that is mostly the reason for all the hits, all the runs. And he will get himself into very, very, very unfavorable counts at times. And it can be demeaning to his ERA and other things like that. The ERA is only it's at 6.6 right now. I think heading into this game it was somewhere around 8 or 9, which was ridiculous. I mean, if you took him in daily fantasy baseball, I mean, all props to you. You got a pretty good start out of him, but I think he does bring something to this Tigers rotation, and I think a guy like Matt Manning, who has been decent over time, but hasn't really brought a lot to the organization for a while, is kind of Montero. I think is kind of the Matt Manning replacement because frankly, he's just struggled, and he's not really the same pitcher that he used to be, and that's sad to think about. Yes, but uh, realistically, what are you going to do? Because there's not a ton of guys that the Tigers can reach to right now. Like, you have a ton of enticing prospects in Double A right now for the Detroit Tigers at the starting pitcher position, but no guy that you think can make an instant impact like Kyler Montero. And I guess I see the vision now after the first two starts kind of being very rough and rocky, and you didn't really know what a Kaiser Montero start looks like. But now we have an idea, and now we have something to build on. This isn't some amazing start, but it's somewhere to be. And I think Hinch is going to look at this as somebody he can rely on because you haven't had a ton of injuries in the pitching rotation so far. I mean, Mize is really the first one. There's been small injuries throughout the season, but you know, Mize is the first big one, I guess I would say, because he might be out for a couple of weeks. So I think Montero might actually get 3 starts before Mize comes back. But I think, barring injury later in the season, Hinch might look to Montero again, and maybe he does become an everyday pitcher. Like maybe if Maeda still struggles, maybe they move Montero to that 5 spot, which I really don't think is going to happen. Like I don't think anytime soon the Tigers are looking to move on from Maeda or make any moves with him, even though he has struggled. It's just when you have a guy on a 2-year deal and your goal is to make him a better pitcher, and you're less than competing for your division, like that's not an issue that's very concerning to the front office. Like in no way is that something that is urgent to the Detroit Tigers organization, which it makes sense. It's just rough to see because some games that you're probably not going to compete due to what has been pretty rough Kenta Maeda starts. But maybe you have another guy to plug in there, and that's Kaiser Montero, another young guy. I really like seeing him, in that starting pitcher position, just because he is so young and you give him so many chances to develop. Versus if you have a guy like Kenta Maeda he's never gonna go back to prime 2020 COVID year Kenta Maeda. Like he will never ever be that pitcher again. But Kaiser Montero can really be any pitcher. I mean, I think he can be very extremely solid at the MLB level, and you kind of just have to throw him in the fire and see. And one thing about why he was so successful today or yesterday, I guess, was the Twins were really first pitch swinging, and I think teams have realized that throughout the year that first pitch swinging is going to help you be very successful against the Tigers' pitching rotation, because the main thing with the pitching rotation has been, hey, if we throw first pitch strikes, we can get ahead on every count. And teams have started to pick up that memo. Like, you can't do that forever. That's something you can sneak by a couple of teams early in the season, but that's you can't make that your identity as a pitching staff. And teams have started to notice that. But this is one of those days where it didn't really go extremely well for the Twins, even though they are a very solid lineup. They're a very solid team. And, they did attack Montero, who, when he's been attacked in the past, has frankly not been an amazing pitcher. But it seems like the Tigers' offense really does the opposite, because the Tigers' offense doesn't really swing on the first pitch to the level that you would think that they would. But I think this is something the Tigers can use to their advantage, because if you gain an identity as a team who tries to sneak first pitch strikes in there, you are going to dominate some teams, frankly. Like, you're going to have pitchers go very deep into games because the pitch count, in all honesty, is not going to be very high. And Montero didn't even end with a high pitch count either. Like, he was out after 80 pitches, which 6 1/3 innings with 80 pitches is ridiculous on 54 strikes. So the notion going around the league is that you need to swing in the first pitch against the Tigers, and that sometimes this is beneficial for teams because it is a risk. Because if you first pitch swing and you get yourself into a quick out and you go back to back to back quick outs, like, you're in trouble. Because this pitching rotation does know how to bear down, right? Like, there can be times where you don't necessarily attempt at a first pitch strike, but that's kind of been the strength. And I think that gives the Tigers the opportunity to win some games that they probably shouldn't win because teams are going to come in with the notion of, hey, if we swing at X amount of first pitches, we're going to get this many hits and, we're going to attack them when they're least expecting it. But I think the Tigers are taking that to their advantage, and that's kind of been something that sneakily happened. And I'm not sure if that's, something very deep analytically, but, I think it's solid. And the Tigers' offense necessarily doesn't first pitch swing a lot, and I think they're actually in one of the lower rates in the entire league. And I kind of like that out of our offense because it seems like they're very patient, and that was beneficial to them in the game yesterday because you did have so many long at-bats, especially from Riley Green, and I feel like I talk about him too much, especially with how patient he is at the plate. But you don't really have a guy like that, right? Like he is a complete superstar in a Tigers uniform, and you have a lot of other guys who I would say, quote unquote, broke out today, and you had 4 home runs and 3 triples. That's a later headline, so we'll talk about that later. But you had 11 hits from your offense. I mean, McKinstry's the only starter that didn't get a hit. Ibanez came in and pitched hit. He didn't get a hit. And Kreidler came in. He didn't even get an at-bat, but he came in for Colt Keith as a defensive replacement after Ibanez came in. But literally everybody got a hit, which is so refreshing to see because there's been so many games where the Tigers have 8 hits, but 3 hitters have 8 hits combined. And, your lineup doesn't eat, but 3 guys do. And that tends to be like Green, Veerling, and then some random 7-8-9 hitter who decides to have the game of his life. But but today, you had some guys who looked really good. Veerling got on base twice, scored twice, was 1 for 5. Colt Keith was 2 for 5. Green was 3 for 4. He was a double away from the cycle. And Colt Keith was up to bat later in the game. Gave a chance, or could have given a chance to Riley Green to have that cycle, but unfortunately just fell short. He struck out on a pitch where, I mean, you could tell he didn't want to swing at it. It was just kind of it was a reaction to the pitch, and he was very frustrated. Obviously, you want to get your guy, at bat. He's that close to the cycle, and a double is very doable. And then, of course, you had Carson Kelly, the grand slam. Wencio Perez, who had a solo bomb right after the Carson Kelly grand slam. And you just keep going down this lineup, and you see a ton of success. Malloy raised his batting average. He is almost up to 200 now, which is good to see. The two strikeout number on the day is still something that you're trying to work on if you're Justin Henry Malloy, trying to work on if you're the Tigers hitting staff. And that's kind of been his only true struggle. But this offense, like I say all the time, this is their weekly offensive explosion. I don't want to read too far into it because I think that is all it is. But it's very refreshing, especially to see one of these offensive explosions where Tigers are very patient in their at-bats. Like, there wasn't gifts today. Like, Tigers earned all of their at-bats. And, I guess this is the next point I want to get to. Carson Kelly showed a very decent day at the plate, and he's kind of turning into what could be a very valuable piece for the Tigers, maybe at the deadline, but maybe also in the future. Because you have a guy like Jake Rogers, you have a guy like Carson Kelly, who are both the same age. They're both 29. And they're kind of in different veins as catchers because I think Rogers is better framing. Carson Kelly has probably been better on the offensive side, and they work together as a tandem. But you could imagine, like, say the Tigers trade Flaherty, that a team might want one of Kelly or Rogers, and Kelly has kind of emerged as that option when earlier in the year in preseason we thought that might have been Rogers. Carson Kelly's hitting 245. He's got a 727 OPS. He just hit his 6th homer on the season. he's looking he's looking fairly better than he did last year. And I was still a fan of his 2023 campaign when he was with the Tigers. Like I didn't hate um what I saw. Obviously the average was not there, but the on base percentage was still solid. A 271 after having a 173 batting average is good. Um, and a 540 OPS is not always encouraging, but I think defensively he did look very good, and I think that's why the Tigers picked up his option to have him for another year because you don't really know if Dingler's MLB ready, and I don't know if that's a position where the Tigers are willing to take a chance on a new AAA guy just for the sake of you have pretty solid two guys that could both be pretty solid starters on some teams. So I don't think, and we've kind of talked about this before. I don't really think Dingler is an option soon unless one of them gets traded at the deadline. But I think teams are going to look at Carson Kelly as a player that could bring a lot of value at the catcher position, and especially if you trade for a guy like Flaherty, having a catcher that is so familiar with somebody who is, and I couldn't believe this when I saw this. Jack Flaherty at some books is top 10 in AL Cy Young voting, which fair enough. Yeah, I agree, but I just was not expecting, Vegas to take that route. And I think Kelly and Rogers have been, you know, very good in helping those pitchers. So I don't know if we move a catcher. I honestly, it could very well be a 50-50 between Rogers and Kelly, and I think it would be, mushed into a trade with Flaherty, or if the bad happens and you trade Skubal, which I'm not married to that idea right now, but you'd imagine for a team that would like to improve pitching and they need a starting pitcher, that having a catcher that can frame really well in Jake Rogers, or having a catcher that has a very solid arm in Carson Kelly, you give yourself a lot of options when you trade for a catcher with a pitcher. And he's been very valuable to this offense, and he attributed grand slam last night, which is not something you normally see out of Carson Kelly. And it was a completely ridiculous game for the Tigers. They had 4 home runs and 3 triples. That is the first time, and this is a Bally Sports stat. That is the first time the Tigers have had 4 home runs and 3 triples since at least 1906. Because when you go that far back, the stats are not fully 100% accurate. So this could be, the longest time for even longer than that. And the Tigers still lead the MLB in triples, which is still so ridiculous to think about for an offense that has had its struggles throughout the year, somehow just gets a ton of triples. And I guess we'll never know why. The speed is there for some guys, yeah, like for Perez and for Vierling and, for McKinstry and for Green and other guys that I would personally put in that category. I'm not sure if other people would put in that category. But just seeing the triple numbers by themselves is ridiculous because you have Green, Perez, and Vierling with 5. And then you have Carpenter with 4, Baду and McKinstry with 2. This is updated after last night's game. So just seeing, these triples starting to be such a very often thing is something I guess you can cheer for as a Tiger fan. I mean, it doesn't win games necessarily. It did today, but I think also the 4 homers kind of attributed into that a little bit. But it's nice seeing the offense have a day like this where your runs come from home runs, because sometimes when the Tigers have their quote unquote weekly offensive explosion, it doesn't always come from home runs, and that's okay. But it's just hard, to see the fact that when your offense explodes, a lot of the times you don't hit homers. But today they hit nukes. Today they hit absolute nukes. The Riley Green homer was amazing, and I love the story that they had on Bally Sports Detroit after the game. They had the 2 kids that received the Riley Green ball. out on the field talking to Riley Green, which I think is just amazing. Riley Green is a man for the people, and I think he showed in that moment how he can be the next Mr. Tiger. I saw that on a tweet somewhere. I'm not sure who to credit with that, but Riley Green is just an amazing guy, and seeing that was very heartwarming. They actually had the two kids on Bally Sports Detroit, um, doing an interview with Johnny Kane, and Benetti's like, "Hey, I bet we can get you a Riley Green autograph." So, I hope those Twins fans become Riley Green fans at some point. But you know, one reason that a lot of people have became Tigers fans in the past, and he has been very solid throughout his career, is Javier Baez. He was he was in Toledo again, for his last rehab assignment, and the first game he looked really solid. Like he was 1 for 2 from the plate. He had a walk, and he looked like he was seeing the pitching a lot better. But last night, Toledo faced Columbus. He's still in Toledo for his rehab assignment, and hitting DH. I think it's fair to say that he struggled, which is sad to see because AAA pitching has not been great this year. Um, but he went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts, which just is it's just hard to see because if you're a Tigers fan, and I'm not sure how long this rehab assignment is going to last, but if you're a Tigers fan, you were hoping this rehab assignment would be huge for Baez, like he would have monster games in AAA, and that just hasn't happened. Torkelson also struggled in this game too, so it's not like Baez was alone. Torkelson went 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts, but it's not like Torkelson's on a rehab. Like Baez is just there for rehab. Um, and I'm not sure what the Tigers are going to look like when Baez is back. I don't know who you move down, frankly. I'm not really a fan of Kreidler. I think he's a great guy, but the game has been below average. But you have other guys who have been below average. I think the McKinstry experiment is almost over. I think Baду has been less than solid. And I think you just struggle in a lot of positions. And I hate to say this, but having Baez back, it would be an advantage to this to this Tigers team. And just seeing a game like this is not always encouraging, but he'll still be in Toledo. I Bleav they have another game against Columbus. Yeah, 7:05 p.m. today. So I think Baez is gonna get he's gonna get a shot at AAA. I mean that's fair to say, and I guess we'll see what he can make of that. Um, because the Tigers are kind of in need of that right now, and they're looking for a series win. They play again today at 1 p.m. Kind of pushed back. It was supposed to be at 2. Um, but Maeda is going to be on the mound for the Tigers. Bailey Ober for Twins. Mark Hanna hitting cleanup, which I do like to see. I do think Mark Hanna has been pretty solid cleanup, and I think he is a really good hitter overall. But I still do think the series win is in reach because you did take that win yesterday, which some people might have not expected. A lot of people, me too, frankly. My friend Jackson Caudell, he does the Bleav in Georgia Tech show. He does daily fantasy sports, and he hit me on a text yesterday and was talking about, hey, do you think I should take a flyer on Kiter Montero? And I'm like, I don't really recommend it. I think he's going to give up like 5 runs in target field. And, Montero actually looks pretty solid. So shout out Jackson Caudell. I told him not to take him, but he did. So, he must know better than I do. And frankly, it worked out. And if the Tigers can scrape by with another win today, they could win the series. And I guess I want to say the series win is in reach because, Bailey Ober hasn't been amazing. But the Tigers offense has struggled against pitchers like him in the past during the season, and um, wow, the third and Keith hit a home run and 1-0 Tigers. Yeah, I'm gonna say the Tigers win this game, and that's Gold Keith's fifth homer this year. I can't believe this. Um, but that is all we have for you today. We'll come back later today with a recap on the game. Hopefully Colt Keith hits for the home run cycle, and we will talk circles around Colt Keith. But, but that is all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Bleav in Tigers. If you feel like I do a horrible job, feel free to leave a review. If you feel like I do an amazing job, feel free to leave a review below. We appreciate all the love, all the support. We'll see you later today. That was your latest episode of Bleav in Tigers. Thank you.